This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Now we look at the process of communication. Communication both within an organisation and outside an organisation, perhaps to suppliers or customers or the government or investors, is obviously very important. It's needed for planning, coordination and control. And here we have a model of communication which is frequently seen. First of all, the thought is formed by the person who wants to initiate the communication. Then it's encoded. So, for example, I am thinking, what do I want to say? And the method of encoding is speaking primarily. Before that, my method of encoding was also producing these slides. So we have a mixture really of both oral and visual communication going on. And then it is transmitted, and to you it's been transmitted via the internet. And then you receive that information and you have to decode it. You have to basically understand it. You have to try and see if it makes sense. And then I might get feedback. Not so much in delivering something over the internet, but if I was delivering this in a live class, I could be watching people hopefully nodding their heads in agreement. Occasionally someone might put up their hand and ask a question and the like. Strictly, the communication can go wrong at any one of these places here, and the technical name for that is normally said to be a barrier to communication. So perhaps the thought wasn't formed very well. One hadn't really thought out what you want to say and so on. Then perhaps it was badly encoded. So if the PowerPoint slide was far too busy, had far too much on it, that could be a barrier to communication. If I used technical language that was not something that you were used to, again, this is going to be a barrier to communication. It could break down on the transmission. If your internet service was too slow, if you had big pauses after a certain amount of what I'd said, as it buffered and so on, this is going to be a barrier to communication. You receive it. So hopefully, for example, there's not too much noise or distraction around when you're looking at it, so you receive it properly. And then you have to decode it. You have to see whether it makes sense to you. It could be that the decoding goes wrong because maybe you have gaps missing in your knowledge or something of that, or maybe you have misunderstood something which has been said. And then, of course, there could be feedback. There's a big barrier to communication in this particular methodology because, of course, it's not a live lecture and I don't really get live feedback. And what we have to do is to try to reduce the chances of these barriers to communication actually happening. You might sometimes see the word noise used. Noise it can be a very general term for a barrier to communication. It means some sort of interference going on. It can be physical noise if you're trying to listen to somebody, but it could be kind of visual distractions and so on as well, which mean you can't concentrate properly on what's being delivered to you. Communication, it can be vertical, so from subordinate up to boss. It can be horizontal between two colleagues of the same level. It can be diagonal from a subordinate to really a manager in another department, and these are all forms which are met with in organizations. And then it can either be formal or informal types of communication. Typically, formal communication is likely to be written. Informal communication is more likely to be oral, spoken communication. So if you wanted to, we've looked at this in looking at employment, we said first of all there might be an oral warning, which is relatively informal, relatively friendly, but at some stage then it ramps up a little bit and it's going to become a written formal warning, and that is a great thing. Basically there's a record of that, record given to the employee, record put on the file and so on. The thing about formal warnings is sometimes they're slower. Formal communication tends to be slower. You have to think what you want to write or what you're going to record and so on. But it does mean that everyone who gets this formal piece of communication gets the same story. Whereas if it's informal, you talk to one person, another person, a third person, if you kind of a number of people in series really, then the chances are they're going to get a slightly different message coming through. Again, informal tends to be useful for relatively short pieces of communication that people can listen to and assimilate okay. Once it gets to be relatively complex, then probably it has to be more formal, more formally written out in the form of a memorandum or a report. And quite often there's going to be a variety of information or communication used at the same time. So it'd be normal maybe for somebody to give a lecture, but also to be giving out lecture notes. And maybe the lecture notes contains a lot of the kind of background detail, whereas the lecture itself concentrates on providing the main points that people are going to remember best. Barriers to communication. We can have inappropriate language. It could be, actual different languages, me speaking English to someone who only understands, let's say, Japanese. But it's more likely to be inappropriate use of terminology that the person to whom you're communicating isn't an expert in the field and simply don't understand the language. And we get that between, legal experts and the clients, accountants and the clients. You get it also in the medical field between maybe doctors who give something a technical name and the poor patient has no idea whether it's serious or not. There can be status. It could be the very junior person is actually frightened to communicate to the more senior person. But sometimes the more senior person's at fault. They don't believe there's anything they can learn from the more junior person. Oh, he's just joined a company. What will this person know? What type of status problems. Emotion. I think we talked about emotion a little bit when talking about appraisal interviews. If people get very worked up, then really you remember very little about the communication process. And of course you become very bad at forming your thoughts and expressing those thoughts. The thoughts are probably in many ways overstated if you kind of aren't calm about it. Wrong medium. For example, a lot of very detailed information being given as just an oral presentation. So if you're finding out about your pension rights in a company, then you want to hear the main gist of it through maybe an oral presentation, but then you have to take a piece of paper away that you can study very closely to understand, and you can refer back to it. Not wanting to transmit, maybe a manager not wanting to give bad news to an employee, not wanting to receive, an employee reluctant to actually receive bad information from a manager. Like one of my children, he always heard the good things that teachers would say at school, but he always seemed to not really take on board any criticisms that teachers might have made of him at school in some of his work. And finally, information overload, just too much. Curse of the email kind of generation we're in now. Emails, there are some people who send them to everybody, and you end up getting hundreds of emails a day perhaps, of which maybe only a relative few are important. And you have to sort through them all, but it's very easy then to overlook the ones which are the ones you should really heed. Negotiation is a specialist form of communication. It does imply that if it's going to work, that the two sides want to get together. So you start a part, maybe in terms of wages that are being offered to people, or working conditions, or how much you're going to sell a product for. And then the idea is that both parties, the seller and the buyer, do actually want the transaction to go ahead. If you actually don't want the transaction to go ahead, if you don't want agreement to be reached, the negotiation isn't actually going to work. So assuming we have a will to get together, to have a common position that we can both agree on, what are the steps? Well, the advice is, first of all, work out what the minimum is that you are prepared to accept. Your kind of line in the sand, so to speak. Certain things you will not give away, as far as you know it anyway, you will not give away. Try to anticipate what the other person wants out of it. And in particular, if you can identify something which is going to be very valuable to them, which is relatively easy or cheap for you to provide. So you can make this concession that doesn't cost you very much, but it's a fantastic value to the other person. It really succeeds in moving people together very, very quickly. You have to listen to the other person as they state what they want, because of course you might have misinterpreted that. You discuss areas in common, so you might be able to say, right, we agree on this, this and this, let's kind of park that over there. Let's work on these two issues where there seem to be differences of opinion. Find out, where the room is for compromise. Hopefully the other side of the negotiation will have worked out how far they are really prepared to go. And you need to see if there's a kind of overlapping position where compromise can be reached. It's worthwhile taking a break from time to time. You're in this kind of constant negotiation. You want to go away and kind of summarize where you've got to, think about it. Think maybe about some of those lines in the sand, whether they were really necessary or really needed. Think, is there anything we could still maybe provide for the other person that would make the agreement much sweeter for them. And then, assuming that agreement is reached, you want to summarize that and to confirm it with the other person. This should be done quickly, because there are, the two sides are kind of moving towards each other. There are lots of, I suppose, opportunities for maybe misunderstanding where you've got to, or forgetting what concessions may have been given. So you want to make sure this is written down and confirmed very, very quickly after the meeting. Otherwise, people are going to, forget really where you got to. Conflict. Conflict is common within organizations. And indeed between organizations, between maybe a supplier and a buyer there. So the reasons for conflict are as follows. You have different objectives. So one manager wants to maximize turnover, but maybe another one wants to maximize profits. And of course, maximizing turnover could maybe be done by reducing selling prices to stimulate volume, but that of course may be hurting profits, or certainly hurting gross profit percentages. There can be competition for resources. It could be money, it could be use of a machine, it could be use of someone's time, or use of a department's time. So there can be conflict there. Personal animosity. Sometimes people simply don't like each other. They rub each other up the wrong way. Really for no good reason other than there's a personality clash. Reward systems can be misconstructed so that one side goes all out, if you like, to win maybe a concession or maybe to win a kind of competition and so on. And this is going to be at the expense of others. And if you think you're really going to suffer if you lose in this competition or in the sales made that month or profit made in the year, comparing your division to another division, then of course it becomes a bit of a kind of needle match, really. It's like a boxing match, and the boxing match obviously ends with maybe one person on the floor, or certainly outpointed decisively. Then obviously, if it's kind of one wins everything, one loses everything, this will generate conflict. And then turf wars. Turf wars is really arguing who's responsible for something. Who's responsible for that customer? So you see a customer, you think they're going to sign a big contract. Two salespeople get involved in it. One wants to get the credit for the contract, the other one wants to get the credit for the contract. And so on, and this is going to give rise to conflict. Conflict is of two sorts. You can have constructive conflict, which is a good thing. There are differences of opinion, maybe valid differences of opinion, and through the processes really of argument, these different solutions, I suppose, are kind of tested out, which is the more resilient, which is actually going to stand up to scrutiny. But then after that's kind of over, the idea is that both parties will be committed to the solution which is best. Destructive conflict is, of course, obviously not going to be useful to both parties or the organisation. Destructive conflict is kind of where you win at all costs. So a kind of example of a destructive conflict: two salespeople are competing, and one salesman, if you like, messes up the chances of the other one, maybe by phoning the client and talking rubbish to them, or maybe by not passing on messages to that person, and so on. So there we have this destructive conflict between these salespeople, where one is concentrating on winning, whereas really, of course, what they should be doing is winning on behalf of the organisation, not on behalf of themselves. You can put conflict onto this matrix here. How assertive are the individuals? How likely are they to kind of say what they want, and you really want, pretty well stick out for what they want, I suppose. And then there's cooperativeness. Are you actually, okay, you know what you want, you say what you want, but are you actually going to move at all in what you are demanding? And we have all of this here. Let's start down here. We maybe won't go through all 5 of them, but low. So there's conflict, but it's kind of bubbling onto the surface, kind of simmering away there, and so on. People won't really come out and say what they want, but of course internally they're kind of suffering great agonies and resentment there, and there's no cooperativeness going on. So this avoidance of conflict is likely at some stage to burst out, if you like, really quite vigorously, when people simply can't avoid it anymore. Up here we have competing. So I know what I want, and I'm not really going to give way. So I want to win, basically. It's like winning a race. There's no cooperativeness in winning a race of any type. It's winner takes all, really. You can be accommodating, which is here, where you're not very assertive. You maybe don't really know what you want very much, or you don't say what it is, and you are very, very cooperative. So you accommodate the other person. This could nearly, in some contexts, be regarded as a form of surrender. You don't say what you want, and you simply go along really with what the other person wants. That may or may not be okay. Depends, what the issue is. If it's a relatively trivial issue, then accommodation might be the easiest way to deal with it. Compromising, a kind of 50-50 place here. Compromising, okay, it's not too bad, but it is a kind of halfway house. What happens in a compromise is neither party is actually fully satisfied. And I suppose you can either look at that glass being half full or half empty in the compromise. And then finally, in the best of all here maybe, is collaborating. You know what you want, but you are very, very cooperative with the other person. And I suppose what we're trying to get here is a win-win as far as we can. We get what we want, they get what they want, by and large. They've done it by cooperating together very well, not too much compromising in there. Everyone ends up feeling that they have won,